Hi, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the CELF-5. CELF stands for the Clinical Evaluation of Language Fundamentals. The CELF-5 is an individually administered clinical tool for the identification, diagnosis, and follow-up of students with language and communication disorders. It works for students who are ages 5 to 21 years old. The test that you will select to administer will depend on the student's age. There are two test forms. There's one for ages 5 to 8 and one for ages 9 to 21. So we are going to walk through the test form for a child who is 5 years and 6 months old. So as you will see, this is what the record form looks like, and it will say ages 5 to 8 years old so that you know you have the correct form. So the first subtest is sentence comprehension. So before you begin any of the subtests, you want to look in the corner. It's going to tell you which item to start with. So for this one, we want to start at item 1 because our child is 5 years old. And then also in the other corner, it is going to have a discontinue rule. So what this means is after the child scores 0, so an incorrect score will equal 0, then you will stop asking questions in that particular subtest. So if they get 4 incorrect answers in a row, you're going to stop and continue on to the next one. Okay, so for sentence comprehension, you're going to introduce each item, and there's a stimulus booklet that goes along with the assessment. So I'm going to say point 2. The girl has a big spotted black and white dog. So then the child would have to point to this picture to receive a score of 1. If they pointed to any of the other pictures, they would just receive a score of 0. Point 2, the girl who is standing in the front of the line is wearing a backpack. Point 2, the boy who is sitting under the big tree is eating a banana. Point 2, the spotted puppy is in the box. Okay. So the next subtest is going to be linguistic concepts. And so you'll turn in your stimulus booklet, you'll see that each subtest has a tab. So that will help you find which pages you should be on for each subtest. All right. So there's also a demo activity that's available before you give each subtest, just so the child understands what they should be doing for the subtest. So for this one, you would say, here are some pictures. I will point to the flower and pause. Now you point to a picture that I name. Point to the house, and they would point to the house. Point to the ball, and they would point to the ball. Sorry. Point to the apple, and so on. So you just want to make sure that the child is understanding the directions and knows what they're supposed to be doing. Okay. So then for the administration of the subtest, here's an example. So I might say, point to the row of apples. And they would have to point to the row of apples. Point to the house and a flower. So then they would have to point to both a house and one of the flowers to receive a correct score of 1. So again, the child can receive a score of 1 or 0. for this subtest as well. So it's either correct or it's incorrect. The next subtest is word structure. So word structure is going to look at concepts like plurals that are irregular and regular, possessive nouns, as well as different tenses. So when we look at the test booklet for word structure, you can see that for all ages, we're going to start at item 1, and there is no discontinue rule. So for this one, we will just continue through the test form until we've completed all items for the subtest. Okay, so this is the demo for this subtest. Here is a boy, and here is a girl. This boy is standing, and this boy is sitting. And you would pause, and you would wait for the child to see if they say sitting. So you would say, this boy is standing, and this boy is, and wait for a response. Okay. Here is 1 cup, here are 2, and then you would pause again and wait for the child to respond, because this is looking at plurals. So we want the child to say 2 cups. We want to hear that S on the end so that we know that they know plurals. Okay. Here is 1 watch, here are 2 watches. Here is 1 horse, here are 2, and then pause. And once again, we're going to wait to see if the child says horses. So once again, the scoring for this subtest is either a 1 or a 0, so it's correct or incorrect. The next subtest is word classes. Okay, so for this one, you're going to give directions, and you're going to say, I am going to say some words and show you some pictures. 2 of the words go together. Puppy and dog are the 2 words that go together best, and you want to point as you're explaining. When you say puppy and dog are 2 words that go together best. Okay. And then the child is going to try, and this one is just a demo as well, just for them to practice. And so you want to say, point to the pictures that go together best. So the child would have to point to the apple and the banana. Okay, so now we'll switch to the second stimulus booklet. There are 2 stimulus booklets included in the CELF-5. So following directions is our next subtest, and all ages start at item 1, and there is no discontinue rule. There is a discontinue rule, I'm sorry. So if a child receives 4 consecutive scores of 0, you're going to stop and move on to the next subtest. Okay, so this one's focusing on, can they follow the directions? So for the demo, I'm going to say, here are some pictures. I will point to the circle. Now you point to the picture that I name. Point to the triangle, and they would have to point to the triangle. point to the X, and they would have to point to the X. So you just go through those just to make sure that they understand that they're supposed to point to each item that you're asking them to point to. All right, so for trial 1, we're going to say, point to the circle and a square. So they're going to point to the circle and then either one of the squares. It doesn't matter which one. As long as they do that, then they would receive a score of 1. Again, the scoring is 1 or 0, correct or incorrect. Point to the big circle and the little X. Point to one of the rows. Go. And then once they point to one of the rows, you instruct them to touch each shape in the row. So they would have to go through and touch each shape one by one to receive a full score of 1. Okay, so our next subtest is formulated sentences, and for this one you'll have to go back into the first stimulus booklet. So there's a lot of flipping pages in the CELF-5. There's a lot of involvement with the stimulus booklet, but it's really helpful it has a lot of great images to show the children. Okay. So for this one, for the formulated sentences, we are going to show the child a picture, and we're going to give them a word, and we're going to tell them, I want you to make a sentence using the word, okay? So for example, in this one, the word is book, and then the child could say, the girl is reading a book. They have to use the given word in a sentence. So, for example, in this one, you would instruct the child to create a sentence using the word in. And here's what some of the pictures look like. Okay. Okay, so the next subtask is recalling sentences. So for this one, there is a starting age. We want to start at item 1 for ages 5 through 6 because our student is 5 years old, and there is a discontinue rule. If the child receives 4 consecutive 0 scores, we're going to stop and move on to the next subtest. Okay, so for this one, we're going to record responses by editing the printed sentence or writing the student's response verbatim in the space provided. So we're going to give the child a score of 3 if the sentence is repeated exactly, and we're going to circle 2 if there's 1 error. If there are 2 or 3 errors, then they'll receive a score of 1. We will circle 0 if there are 4 or more errors. So we basically are testing whether the child can repeat the sentence given. Okay, so there's 2 trials for examples just to make sure they understand the directions. So the first one is, the children are working. So the child will have to say, the children are working. Did the girl catch the baseball? And then they would repeat, did the girl catch the baseball? Did you remember to bring your lunch? And then again, they would repeat, and so on. And sometimes if the child provides an answer to the question, like if they say yes or no, you want to say, well, that's a good answer, but I want you to repeat after me. So I'm going to say it, and then you say it. So you just want to make sure that they understand they're not answering the question, they're just repeating what they hear. Okay, so next we have understanding paragraphs. So once again, there is a trial just to make sure that the students understand that they're supposed to listen to what the examiner is reading, and then they're going to answer questions about it. So you are going to introduce the trial and the paragraphs appropriate for the student's age by saying, listen carefully to what I am going to read to you. Afterward, I will ask you some questions about what I read. Read the title and the paragraph to the student at a conversational level and rate, and then read the associated questions. Circle a 1 for a correct response, and circle 0 for an incorrect response. Okay, so I'm just going to read you a paragraph and give you some examples of questions that you would ask the child. So this paragraph is Rudy and Lewis. It had been raining for 2 days, and the twins were tired of playing indoors. They wished it would stop raining. Rudy wanted to play baseball. Lewis wanted to play on the new swings at the playground, and then play baseball with his brother Rudy. As they got ready for bed that night, they could still hear the rain coming down on the roof. When they woke up the next morning, they didn't hear the rain. Instead, Rudy and Louise heard birds chirping outside their window. Why did Rudy and Lewis wish it would stop raining? And then they would have to answer the question. What did Rudy and Lewis hear before they went to bed? And then they would answer the question. So it's just reading comprehension questions. Really straightforward. In the record booklet, the directions are all in there for you. All right. So then lastly, there is a pragmatics profile. So it's a checklist of different items related to pragmatics that you would want to be checking off throughout the assessment. It includes different components like rituals and conversational skills. So for example, do they respond to greetings to and from others? Do they demonstrate turn-taking skills? Do they maintain eye contact and gaze? There's also a section that outlines student asking, does the student ask for directions? Do they make requests appropriately? Just different aspects of social communication that you would want to keep an eye out for during the assessment. And then there's also a section for nonverbal communication skills. Do they use facial cues or expressions? Do they have an appropriate tone of voice? Are they using body language, gestures? Do they express messages using gestures or facial expressions? So there's some pretty specific aspects of communication on this checklist, but it's really important to take note of these different things while you're doing the assessment.